Looking at the two different groups of world deniers and world affirmers. And we're looking at different subgroups under those. So we've begun by looking at the world deniers. And I've got three different subgroups here that I want to discuss under that. The first group are those who we think rightly deny the world. We think that's the right position, but we think they do it in a wrong fashion. Those are the ones who are superstitiously ignorant and therefore fearful of the world. And so it's been our claim that superstition, which is really superstitiousness, is just beliefs based on unfounded myths, often of uncivilized people, that you find even among the most civilized people. We think superstitiousness is not enough of a reason to reject the world, because superstitiousness itself is something that's very difficult to get your hands on. It seems like, how could you really be doing the right thing? Although we think that world denying is the right thing, but right in the sense that not only have you chosen the right path, but all of the other things that combine to make that choice the proper choice are also good and right. How can you really be doing the right thing when it's involved in superstition? Doesn't seem like that you could be on the right path, even if you've chosen the right biblical position of being a world denier. You're really not on the right path, because you're on a path for a wrong reason, for a very misguided reason. And the other thing that we've added to this is ignorance. People reject that which they really know nothing about. And so the psychologist will be on the scene very quickly to tell us, well, often it is the uninitiated who have the greatest fear about something, because being uninitiates, it's an unknown to them. And so how are they qualified to accept or to reject if they're ignorant about the topic under consideration? So a superstitious, ignorant fear of the world. It seems to pop up in different areas, such as the following. Pops up in charismatic circles with, and maybe even in non-charismatic circles, with the subject of demons and the demonic. Or you could even say with the subject of angels as well. There's such a superstition about the whole matter. It's almost as though, it's not almost, a lot of people do hold to this position, that if you even read any literature from some cult, you'd pick up a demon from doing that. I don't think they really understand what's going on. That's superstition right there. Someone asked me here just a few services ago, and then the very same day, that evening as a matter of fact, my wife brought up the same matter with these two people not having, discussed the matter between themselves. This brother asked me, he said, do we still believe? He was just, I don't think he was, I don't know what, he'll have to speak for himself, but here's what he said. Do we still believe that God could appear or speak to people today? And I said, we certainly do. But you know how people have this notion about hearing God or Him appearing to them. It's something superstitious involved about that. There's some superstitiousness in that. I said, we surely do. He appeared way back in the beginning of history, and He's appeared in different periods of history from the beginning of time right until, let's say, the New Testament. There's the end of our inspired records. And of course, the question is, what about from the New Testament days until now? Do we believe that we could hear His audible voice, that He would appear, or that angels would appear? So we certainly do believe that. And we believe very much in the miraculous. If we don't believe in the miraculous, that's the heart of the biblical faith. I mean, if we don't believe in the miraculous, that just rules out everything that the biblical faith stands for. The very God and the very center and heart of all of that. But I was explaining to him, I said, but don't you feel something different in your own heart when you say that you do believe that God is alive and that He's real today? When you say to yourself, I do believe that He still speaks, that we can hear His voice inwardly, and on occasions He does speak audibly. He did in the Old Testament, He did in the New. He spoke to prophets, and I don't think they had this superstitiousness about them. The voice of God would come, and they were cognizant of that fact, and they were, I won't say they were always in their senses, because when you have an experience, when God appears to you, well, He's never appeared to me that way, so I don't know that you just sit there with all calm, rational senses, but they knew what was going on. and it affected them. It wasn't just a thing that you run to church about, now we have a testimony that I saw God or I saw an angel or something. It wasn't that way for them. Whenever Isaiah has his revelation of God in chapter 6, that profoundly affects his entire ministry. And that's the reason behind one of the questions we asked you in that theology quiz: which of the prophets uses most often that name for God, the Holy One of Israel? You see, it's Isaiah, and there's a reason why. And the reason why is coming into play with what I'm saying now. He didn't just have a little vision, have a little revelation, a little small voice of God or something, and that was it, something that you could, write a testimonial about or give a testimony at church about. I mean, it was real to Isaiah. It changed his thought about everything. I mean, he was a believer in Yahweh prior to that, but after that, was he a believer in God? And what he heard was, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, and smoke and incense were going everywhere. And what he heard was, holy, holy, holy. And so he, more than anyone else, uses that as a designation for God, the Holy One of Israel. I'm sure Jeremiah knew and thought he was holy, and so did Moses. But Isaiah, with this revelation, was very different for him. So it seems to pop up in the area of, demons and angels, spirits, we could say, that people are superstitious about it. Even if they had an experience, I think that they would probably deal with that experience in a very unspiritual, perhaps unscriptural way. I think it pops up in the area of healing as well. They just have a mixed bag of potent witch doctor cures, it seems like, whenever they approach the subject of healing. Instead of having a thought-out position of who God is and their relationship to God and what they feel he has said about the matter, and therefore what the obvious conclusion is for them in their life. That's why you just hear teaching after teaching after. Why do you hear teaching after teaching after teaching on the same subject of healing, except you're trying to almost convince someone of something against their will? It's never presented so that here's the matter, and it's true. It really is true. And so people say, okay, if that's true, that's what I'm going to believe from now on. It's you preach on it, and you throw in a few little miracles from some foreign country that are just totally unsubstantiated. No one could prove them. They're so far away, or from way back in history or something kind of quasi-mystical in your own experience. This is what God did for me. And people remember all the illustrations and all the testimonies, and then they get in some serious situation themselves, and they don't have any faith in their heart. And proof of the fact they don't have any faith is the repetitive teaching on faith. It just goes on and on and on. Amen. If you've got it, you should have it. I'm not saying you couldn't teach on it twice, but you know what I'm saying. Those people who hear it don't even have it. They don't believe God. Right. They don't believe in healing. If it came to a life and death situation, they would just be frantic, and they often are. And that shows something is not right in their whole conception of this matter. They don't really believe what they've been paying lip homage to the whole time. They don't have a belief in that. Somewhere, you see, we've gotten off the path of the track. Somewhere we need to turn around and go back to square one, letter A, number one. We need to start right there again. Now, what is this whole matter? What does God say about it? What do we believe about this matter? Amen. Instead of just going and going and going, trying to convince ourselves of something we really don't believe. And you know how it's presented almost as though that's the ideal, that if you can be talked into something even when your head is screaming no, then that's just great. That proves that it's true, deep faith. That's a good statement right there. I mean, that's a proof. That's a proof that it's great faith, oftentimes, from the way they teach. Is your head is screaming no, and you're just battling all of this and battling all of that, and you kind of halfway doubt it, and you're just going to persevere anyway. And that's why those people, end up as fertilizer 6 feet under the ground. They don't have any faith for those matters at all in their life. They've just approached it from a superstitious angle. And they've got their great faith formulas of, I'll go to the very end, or I'll die for this, and sometimes they'll even die for it. But they've got a very superstitious, ignorant approach to it. The area of liberalism, it pops up again. Don't read anything the liberals have to say. Don't get near anything that's liberal. They have such a great fear, a lack of control of themselves, I think I've said before, that they fear they're going to fall into that if they get anywhere near it. And I'll remind you that we're not like the neo-evangelicals who say, yeah, that's right, these fundamentalists who have rejected all of liberalism, we think you ought to even go to liberal schools and get your degrees there, and then if you can stay strong there, that will really prove that you have the faith and you've got the biblical message and everything. Well, we're not like that either. I mean, we're addressing these matters to you personally. Know what you believe. There's no fear of reading what a liberal has to say and falling into it. You can't fall into something accidentally unless you're just some superstitious, ignorant person. And that's why we're covering it here. Those are the ones who generally end up falling there. You can't just fall into it. That's superstition. Where's your belief that if you're a child of God seeking to the best of your ability God's will, I mean, that's quite a testimony of what you say you aren't. Because if you're that type of person, one seeking God's will, you're not going to accidentally fall into liberalism or something. The way you end up a liberal is you choose that way. Right. Sure, you've heard others say it or you read their books, but you still choose to follow that way. There's no harm in getting near a liberal or reading what a liberal has to say. And we're not like the neo-evangelicals. We're not trying to read all their material so we can then go and teach at their schools and refute all of their teaching and turn the whole country back to conservatism or something. We think that's a false goal, a false hope, a hope of illusion to ever even entertain such a thought. It's to you personally, what do you believe? It's so that whenever you are called upon to give a response, that you can earnestly contend for the faith, not just rambling on and on with some somewhat rococo argument, but that you know what you believe. It's contemporary. You believe it now. It's biblical now. The Scriptures have in several places something to say. Colossians 4, I believe, says to be ready to give an answer to every man. Amen. 1 Peter 3, I think, talks about the same thing. Hey, those are interesting passages, by the way. I don't think we've looked at those in this connection. With what we're saying, know for yourself what you believe. I guess you'd have to know or you couldn't fulfill something like Colossians 4:6. Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that ye may know how ye ought to answer every man. I know that the old typical thing is, well, just say, if you don't believe what I believe and I can already tell you don't believe it, then we're not even going to talk about the matter. Sometimes it comes to that. But I mean, that's their whole superstitious mentality. I'm under no obligation to explain to anyone anything I believe unless they're going to follow it all the way. But I've had numerous people, I did when I was in seminary, question me, what are your beliefs? What do you believe about this? I didn't just say, well, I know already you're not going to believe them, so I won't even tell it to you then. Well, that's not what the Scriptures say. That ye may know how ye ought to answer every man. We were talking about this Sunday morning. See, you don't pay me to answer people for you. And how can you fulfill this? Know how to answer every man. Do you know how to answer every man? Well, not yet, but we're on our way there. We'll have to teach you all of these doctrines and what they believe. And then find out what do you believe. And we'll get the two together. You ought to be able to answer them then. And then in 1 Peter 3, verse 15. Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh. Of course, this is from a different apostle. These are two different men. That asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. One woman was sharing tonight about that. Someone asked her, what is your reason for this hope? What do you believe? And she's able to answer them then. Give a discussion of the matter. That's always a blessing whenever you can do that. Amen. So we don't want to be so superstitious. We don't want to be at all. And so ignorant like a lot of people are, that we fear the world, that we're afraid of the world. And it's as though we can't control ourselves. We have to keep ourselves away from the world because we might fall into it. So the old adage that what you don't know won't hurt you just won't fit here. It won't fit in most cases. What you don't know won't hurt you. It oftentimes will. So tonight, let's come to a second area. They tie together, but I'm keeping them separate because I want you to understand both of them without just them being lumped together. Another and a second world-denying position. Here, these people, unlike the first ones who are superstitious and ignorant, have a legalistic repulsion to the world. It's very similar to the first position. It's characteristic of fundamentalists. It's characteristic of charismatics. Here these people have been brought up with not the fundamentalist 10 commandments, but the fundamentalist 613 commandments of the things that you are not supposed to do. A whole lot of thou shalt nots. Now the evangelicals, especially the neo-evangelicals, I've seen that there's the problem here. It's almost as though one has reversed the order of the Bible, and now we're living in the Old Testament days because everything is a thou shalt not, and they have their famous litany of thou shalt nots. And it's not 10, it just goes on and on, but there are a few that stand at the very head of the list. Well, I think there's a problem with this attitude, a legalistic repulsion. I mean, you're just repulsed by the world, but it's a legalistic type of repulsion to the world. It's not really based on any true knowledge, no true convictions. It's just, I've heard what I'm not supposed to like to do. I might still like to, but I've heard what I'm not supposed to like to do. You know, I can't wear lipstick or attend movies or square dance. And you can fit in the other things that always head the list out here. And I know I've been told I'm not supposed to do these things because these things are worldly. These things are worldly. Well, the evangelicals have seen there is a problem with an attitude like that. And so the evangelicals, especially the neos, I think overcompensate by attempting to turn the gospel into nothing but thou shalts. They take all the nots out of there, thou shalt nots. They try to turn the whole situation around so that the gospel is nothing but, that's the two words I'm emphasizing, nothing but a list of thou shalts. Thou shalt do this, thou mayest do this, you can do that. In other words, this overly benevolent, graciously loving and descending Father up there who says we can do everything. He doesn't ever tell us anything that we can't do. Well, then you've overcompensated for the fault that we're finding among the fundamentalists. They said thou shalt not. Evangelicals, thou shalt. Surely the emphasis of the New Testament is a thou shalt emphasis. And the emphasis of the Old is a thou shalt not. But that doesn't preclude thou shalts in the Old and thou shalt nots in the New. In other words, we're going to have to find the balance. We would hope that we've got the right emphasis, depending on when we're living. If we're living when we are now, the emphasis should be a thou shalt emphasis. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a whole lot of thou shalt nots in the New Testament. I don't know why. It's just that they've read that the Ten Commandments, and to them it sounds like bondage and legalism. They think the fundamentalists are basing their beliefs too much on that. And so they take all of the knots out, and let's say reverse the commandment so that you can take the knots out and then pronounce a thou shalt, be chaste instead of thou shalt not commit adultery. But then still, the New Testament says more than thou shalt be chaste. It says don't commit adultery and don't commit fornication. It still has the don'ts there. They tend to overlook that. So, in other words, I think that the fundamentalist thou shalt not, this legalistic repulsion, it should be given up. Their sub-biblical legalistic view to the matter should be given up. Their view of world denying shouldn't. Their litany of chief sins are often these typical social endeavors, social acts that we just are told about all the time, and yet in that litany we don't have some of the weightier matters of the law. It's almost as though they would equate square dancing and card playing and lipstick with murder, adultery, and pride. I've never found yet on a fundamentalist list of thou shalt nots, thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not have any pride, and thou shalt not gossip. What you'll find on there are those social acts, square dancing, card playing, and wearing lipstick. And you being from the north, surely you've heard of it, but you're not as familiar maybe as those of us who are brought up in the South, especially in the Southern Christian school tradition, although the parochial Catholic school is similar. Of all of the yardsticks and the old gray-headed matrons that stand at the door to measure the girls' dresses whenever they come to school. That was always a problem in the Southern Christian school tradition. And different schools in different times would allow different inches above or below the knee, you know. They would just go through that all the time. Get little yardsticks out, little rulers out, and measure, you know, from the knee up to the dress, or if you were of the school, from the knee down to the dress, you know, however far. And that was so important. And so children grow up with these notions. That was so important. You know, other things like cheating or well, all athletics is pride for most people there, and they just encourage athletics, but don't say anything about the pride involved or the selfishness involved there. And the children are brought up thinking of certain do's and don'ts as the heart of religion, as the heart of Christianity. The Jews had the same problem. Jesus said, you've left out the weightier matters of the law. Matthew 23:23b. You've left out the weightier matters of the law. See, we're not at this point in our study passing any judgment on wearing certain forms of clothing or card playing or whatever. We're not passing any judgment on that. That's not the issue for us right now. It's the attitude that people have when they're approaching the subject of are we going to deny or affirm the world that we are discussing at this point. So the evangelicals say, yes, that's right, you fundamentalists, you legalistic souls, why don't we find on your list things like pride or unbelief or adultery or gossip? Why is it we find things about card playing and tobacco chewing and pipe smoking? Why is it we find that? We'll see what the evangelicals then almost do in their attitude is they put on the list, you know, adultery and divorce and all the weightier matters, and they take the lesser matters off the list. Oh, it's all right to wear lipstick. It's all right to go to parties. It's all right to dance. It's okay to drink. That's what so often happens, and that's the whole thrust of everything we do around here. Why is it that Group A is wrong and Group B notices that Group A is wrong? And so Group B, in their attempt to reconstruct the matter and set matters straight, go overboard the other way. And they become just as wrong as Group A. Just as wrong as the group they're criticizing and the group that they're trying to restructure and bring back into line with biblical teaching. They've taken off the list. And that's why you'll find it's no problem at all in a lot of Christian churches for you to drink within limits and smoke within limits and attend movies and read certain literature and, you know, whatever the litany of don'ts is from the fundamentalist heritage. Well, you've gone too far then. We've got to address the attitude, which is what we're after right now. And then we've got to address each of those specific issues as well. Seems like one group wants to address the issues and another group wants to address the attitude. Fundamentalists like all the issues, don't. And the evangelicals, well, we need to have a do attitude. And so one is stressing one and the other is stressing the other. We've got to eventually discuss both of those. It's okay to stress one at a certain time, but not to the total neglect of the other, or not to say, well, now that we've stressed, you know, let's say, for instance, the attitude, then once you got your attitude right, that answers all the other questions. Well, it never did in my mind. I'd still like to know about things like lipstick. Even if my attitude is okay whether I wear it or not, I mean, my mind is satisfied either way, well, then all you are is just forever in the attitude of being satisfied either way, but never knowing which way is the right way, though. It's good to have your attitude right. That's where we would start. See, we're not starting with what you can or can't do. It's good to start with the attitude, and the attitude is his whole position of worldliness. That's why we're discussing it here. How do we stand with regard to the world? See, I know what all the arguments are. How can you say this is worldly, and how can you say that? We're going to get to all of that later on. We think the Bible answers those matters. But we've got to start with the attitude and then grow from that and go from that somewhere else and then deal with those issues. people who start with the issues, of course, their attitude is wrong, and the evangelicals have noted that in the fundamentalist camp. Their attitude is wrong. They almost think that if you do this or don't do this certain list of things, then you're pleasing in the eyes of God. The Jews certainly felt that way. See, that's the problem you fall into with legalism. There's so many ins and outs and problems you fall into. When you get up this list of social sins or social acts that you are not to do, then what happens whenever you totally withdraw yourself from all of that? You feel pride in your heart. You feel self-justified. You feel as though God now owes you something, or certainly this is what you feel: I feel better than other people around me. Oh, that's always there. You feel better than other people because you don't do what they do. And wasn't that the Pharisees' attitude? I'm not like other men. I do this, that, and the other. I'm not like other men. That's a very poor attitude to have. Say, well, what should the attitude be once we're in a position where truly we are not like other men? But the issue is, why are we not like other men? By the grace of God. It's not because we have memorized a litany of don'ts and we've done it. It's by the grace of God. Certainly we'll be not like other men, but it'll be by the grace of God, and not because we have legalistically kept some formulas that we've memorized. Formulas that we don't know anything about, we're superstitious in our approach to, we're ignorant in our attitude about. Someone else has told us these are the things to do or not to do, and we simply have believed what they've said without thinking it out on our own. Here's another problem, I think, that, well, I'll tell you what, before I go beyond that, let me spend a little time reading a beautiful example, because I think the examples, several examples that I give you, and one particularly long one here, it'll take a little time to read this, will show you, this was back, 50 years ago, the time context for these examples, but that's right in the fervor of the birth and the growth of early fundamentalism. And we see the same thing, the same characteristic traits, the same habits being performed at large in the charismatic movement. And if you want a microscopic example of all of that, then just visit Faith Assembly, especially Faith Assembly of bygone days. They were a classic example of people who were superstitious, who were ignorant, and who were legalistic. That's why these two go together. I mentioned three words, but these two aspects of those who choose to be world deniers go together. A classic, microscopic example in the whole of Christendom and the charismatic movement out there of people who fit this to a T. Now, I'm going to be reading some from Steinbach's Grapes of Wrath. I think this is in chapter 23. All I've got marked down right now are the page numbers. Let me give you a little of the background if you've never read Grapes of Wrath. I remember whenever I first came across this, it's been a long time ago, but when I come across these things in readings, and I remember where I've seen this. Sometimes I mark it. Sometimes if I know we're going to be there in the future, or I could use it in the future, then I already start cross-referencing and taking notes, but I didn't know it when I first read Grapes of Wrath, and I was going to be needing it or talking about worldliness now. But Steinbach, writing, I guess this was in the 1930s, probably this was written. It's during the Depression, and a lot of the small-time farming families in the Midwest, particularly in Oklahoma and in Texas and Kansas, are being pushed out. They can't afford to farm their own land anymore, but the big banks, the big corporations, the big men are just gathering together all of these pieces of property. It's like Isaiah, I think in chapter 5, talks about buying land, joining on land, just buying up all the land, running out of business, all of the small-time farmers. And so they've got to go somewhere. Well, what the banks do, and this is all true to history. This is a novel, of course, make-believe novel, Grapes of Wrath, but it is very true to life if you read some of the Depression history in this country. The banks had all these posters printed up that were just everywhere in Oklahoma of how good, how beautiful, and how much work there was out in California. There are grapes to pick, and it's just, and see, the Dust Bowl had been at the same time in Oklahoma and Kansas and just had destroyed everything. When you hear of a place in your own country, just on the other side of the mountains, California, That's like the Garden of Eden. Well, truckload after truckload after truckload went over the Rocky Mountains to the land of fame and fortune in California. Of course, whenever they got there, there were so many other people competing for jobs. What does that do? It drives the value of work down to rock bottom. You can't make anything for what you're doing. And yet the only thing to do out there is pick fruit and vegetables. And you've got to do something. And people literally starved to death. They couldn't make enough money. They couldn't find enough to eat. They were herded on government camps and would go out early in the morning and would work all day long for a dime and a nickel and a quarter and then try to buy enough food for their family. It's horrible. I've done extensive reading in American literature in this century, and nothing has hit me more strongly than Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. And I've read East of Eden and all these other books. East of Eden doesn't even compare to Grapes of Wrath. This is a moving, moving account. I'll never forget the very last sentence, the last chapter, the last page of the book. She looked up and across the barn, and her lips parted, and she smiled mysteriously. Oh, you wouldn't know what it's talking about if you haven't read it, but it's a glorious ending. Well, one of the girls here is a girl named that they call Rose of Sharon. Notice how it's a biblical name. What you'll find, let me just give you another little clue to studies in worldliness here. As we go along, let's say the next months, I'm sure it'll be months, we're going to be coming across again and again various references to literature, various books that I'm going to be using just all the time. We're going to talk about a lot of the philosophers again. I know we've talked about them before, Kant and Hegel and Nietzsche and Dewey and John Stuart Mill and Aristotle and Plato, and we're going to be talking about that a lot and about a lot of different writings, a lot of American and other literature like Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet writer. A lot of his literature is just fantastic. Fantastic. Schaeffer uses Solzhenitsyn a lot, and Leon Tolstoy is another Soviet writer. Just some beautiful things they have to say about what's going on in the world. So I'll clue you into that so you can be prepared. Here we'll begin tonight then. Oh, what I was going to say, what brought that to my mind was the fact that unknown to, I think, a lot of people who read only a little, the great works of literature, like Grapes of Wrath, are oftentimes filled with biblical metaphors and biblical truth. A lot of times, people like Steinbeck, he's been brought up in a religious environment. He's rejected all of that. He revolts against all of that. He revolts against it, I'll show you why, because of the way he sees it, fundamentalism of his day. But this girl's name is Rose of Sharon. That's obviously comes right out of the Song of Solomon. Just amazing. All of the stories of American literature are just intertwined with biblical history. Rose of Sharon and her family have gone from Oklahoma to California. They can't find anything to do. She's pregnant. She has a husband who's no good, and he's run off and left her at this time. He snuck away because, well, he can't afford her, he can't afford the child, he can't find any work, and he's kind of a no good anyway. And Rose of Sharon, how can I describe her? She is the most superstitious, just little fraidy cat that you could ever ask for. And they've come into a government camp now. It's the first time they've seen flush toilets. They've never seen them before. And the two little kids in the group, I forget what their names are. If someone remember what their names are. Oh, Ruthie's one of them. Ruthie and whatever the other one is. They go in there and they flush it, and the water, down in there, and they're just petrified. They think they're going to be drowned, and they go tearing out of there. They've never seen that before. And they go tell Ma about it, and Ma comes in, and she's so proud of the fact that she's seen that once before in her life. I mean, she acts as an authority. She said, I've seen this before. I know how to operate it. She goes and does it, and she jumps back. And it's just a hilarious account here. Now, Rose of Sharon is there. They're at this government camp. Men folk have gone out working. Women folk stay around and clean camp. They just live in tents and off the back of their truck. And, well, let me just pick up the story and see if you can't get it. Rose of Sharon sat down heavily on a box and regarded her wedding shoes, black patent leather and tailored black bows. She wiped the toes with her finger and wiped her finger on the inside of her skirt. Leaning down, put pressure on her growing abdomen. She sat up straight and touched herself with exploring fingers, and she smiled a little as she did it. Along the road, a stocky woman walked, carrying an apple box of dirty clothes toward the washtubs. Her face was brown with sun, and her eyes were black and intense. She wore a green apron made from a cotton bag over her gingham dress, and men's brown Oxfords were on her feet. She saw that Rose of Sharon caressed herself, and she saw the little smile on the girl's face. "So," she cried. She laughed with pleasure. "What do you think it's going to be?" Rose of Sharon blushed and looked down at the ground, and then peeked up, and the little shiny black eyes of the woman took her in. "I dunno," she mumbled. The woman plopped the apple box on the ground. "Got a live tumor," she said, and she cackled like a happy hen. "Which you ruther?" she demanded. "I dunno. Boy, guess. Sure, boy." "You just come in, didn't you? Last night, late. Gonna stay?" "I dunno. If we get work, guess we will." Shadow crossed the woman's face, and the little black eyes grew fierce. "If you can get work, that's what we all say." "Well, my brother get a job already this morning." "Did, huh? Maybe you're lucky. Look out for luck. You can trust luck." She stepped close. "You can only get one kind of luck. Can't have more. You be a good girl," she said fiercely. "You be good. If you got sin on you, you better watch out for that there baby." She squatted down in front of Rose of Sharon. "They's scandalous things goes on in this here camp," she said darkly. "Every Saturday night they's a dancing. And not only square dancing. They does some clutching and a hugging dancing. I seen 'em." Rose of Sharon said guardedly, "I like dancing, square dancing." And she added virtuously, "I never done that other kind." The brown woman nodded her head dismally. "Well, some does, and the Lord ain't letting it get by neither. And don't you think he is?" "No, ma'am," the girl said quickly. The woman put one brown, wrinkled hand on Rose of Sharon's knee, and the girl flinched under the touch. "You let me warn you now. There ain't but a few deep-down Jesus lovers left. Every Saturday night, when that there string band starts up, and should be a-playing hymnody, they's a-reelin', yes, sir, a-reelin'. I seen 'em. Won't go near myself, nor I don't let my kin go near. They's a-clutchin' and a-huggin', I tell you." She paused for emphasis, and then said in a hoarse whisper, "They do more. They give a stage play." She backed away and cocked her head to see how Rose of Sharon would take in such a revelation. "Actors?" the girl said in awe. "No, sir," the woman exploded. "Not actors, not them already curse word people. Our own kind of folks, our own people. And they was little children, didn't know no better in it. And they was pretending to be stuff that they wasn't. I didn't go near, but I heard 'em talking, what they was a-doing. The devil was just a-strutting in this here camp last night." See this legalism here? It's fear and superstitiousness. You might not find it exactly so expressed, but a lot of people are caught up in this. And Steinbeck is very familiar with it, and because he's familiar with that, that's how he sees Christianity, is this type of it. So he's rejected Christianity. A lot of people have done the same thing. They've seen this aspect of Christendom, and so they reject the whole walk. But Steinbeck's at his best, I think, whenever he's describing some of the religious tidbits in his book. Rose of Sharon listened, her eyes and mouth open. "Well, once in school, we give a Christ child play. Christmas. Well, I ain't saying that's bad or good. They's good folks thinks the Christ child is all right, but, well, I wouldn't care to come right out and flat say so. But this here wasn't no Christ child. This here was sin and delusion and devil stuff, strutting and a parading and speaking like they somebody they ain't, and dancing and a clutching and a hugging like they was. Rose of Sharon sighed. And not just a few neither, the brown woman went on. Get so yous can almost count the deep down lamb blood folks on your toes. Hear what she calls them, deep down lamb blood. Do you think this woman is saved who's doing all this talking? She's as far from Christianity as Rose of Sharon is. She's probably further from Christianity than those people who are clutching and hugging up there on the platform. She has such a perverted view of what it means to be bought by the blood of the Lamb. Don't you think them sinners is putting nothing over on God neither. No, sir. He's a-chalking them up sin by sin, and he's a-drawing his line and adding them up sin by sin. God's a-watching, and I's a-watching too. He's already smoked 2 of them out. Rose of Sharon pants. Has. Brown woman's voice was rising in intensity. I seen it. Girl a-carrying a little one just like you. And she play-acted, and she hugged and danced, and the voice grew bleak and ominous. She thinned out, and she skinnied out, and she dropped that baby dead. Oh, my! Rose of Sharon was pale. She's just frightened over anything like this. Dead and bloody, the woman continued. Of course, nobody would speak to her no more. She had to go away. Can't touch sin without catching it. No, sir. And they was another done the same thing. She skinnied out. And know what? One night she was gone. 2 days she's back. Says she was a visiting. But she ain't got no baby. Know what I think? I think the manager, he took her away to drop her baby. He doesn't believe in sin. Told me himself. Says the sin is being hungry. Says sin is being cold. Says, I told you, he told me himself, can't see God in them things. Says them girls skinnied out because they ain't get enough food. Well, I fixed him up. She rose to her feet and stepped back. Her eyes were sharp. She pointed a rigid forefinger in Rose of Sharon's face. I says to that manager, get back. I says, I know the devil was rampaging in this here camp. Now I know who the devil is. Get back, Satan, I says. And by Christ, he got back. Trembling he was, and sneaky. Says, please, don't make folks unhappy. I says, unhappy? How about them souls? How about them dead babies and them poor sinners ruined? Cause them play acting. He just looked, and he gave me a sick grin and went away. He knowed when he met a real testifier in the Lord. I says, I'm a helping Jesus. Watch this goings on here. And you and them other sinners ain't getting away with it. She picked up her box of dirty clothes. You take heed, I warned you. You take heed, that poor child in your belly, and keep out of sin. And she strode away titanically, and her eyes shone with virtue. Every line, Steinbeck is a master of writing here. You know, this woman, you see, she thinks she's done God's service by frightening poor Rose of Sharon out of her wits here. Rose of Sharon would never be someone doing any clutching and a hugging anyway. She's such a shy little girl here. But this woman, how did she go away? She strode away titanically, and her eyes shone with virtue. I's a Jesus lover. You know, I's a-watching, God's a-watching, I's a-watching. He's counting them up and done smoked 2 of them out of here. Such a perverted view of what religion is all about. That's not Christianity. But yet she talks about lamb-bought people, or blood-bought people here. She said that there are very few deep-down Jesus lovers left. She counts herself as one of those. All right? Now, Moll, who is Rose of Sharon's mother, she doesn't let anybody put anything over on her. And so this woman is going to show up again, still in the same chapter. I think this is 23. I'd have to look back here. She's going to show up again to Rose of Sharon, but now Rose of Sharon's got her maul by. Rose of Sharon peered down the road. That's what they call her, maul. Rose of Sharon peered down the road. That lady that says, I'll lose the baby, she began. Now you stop that, Maul warned her. Rosa Sharon said softly, "I seen her. She's a-comin' here, I think. Yeah, here she comes. Ma, don't let her—" Ma turned and looked at the approaching figure. "Howdy," the woman says. "I'm Miss Sandry, Lisbeth Sandry. I seen your girl this morning." "Howdy do," said Ma. "Are you happy in the Lord?" "Pretty happy," said Ma. "Are you saved?" "I been saved." Ma's face was closed and waiting. "Well, I's glad," Lisbeth said. "The sinners is awful strong around this here camp. You come to an awful place. They's wickedness all round about. Wicked people, wicked goings-on that lamb blood Christians just can't hardly stand. They's sinners all around us." Ma colored a little and put her mouth tightly. "Seems to me they's nice people here," she said shortly. Miss Sandry's eyes stared. "Nice!" she cried. "You think they nice that's a-dancing and a-hugging and a-clutching? I tell you, your eternal soul ain't got a chance in this here camp. Went out to a meeting in Weed Patch last night. Know what the preacher says? He says they's wickedness in that camp. He says the poor is trying to be rich. He says they's dancing and hugging when they should be wailing and moaning in sin. That's what he says. Everybody that ain't here is a black sinner, he says. I tell you, it made a person feel pretty good to hear 'em. And we knowed we was safe. We ain't danced." See, if you didn't do those things, you equate it, I'm pleasing in the eyes of God. Now you're understanding what I'm talking about. Superstitious, legalistic repulsion. Ma's face was red. She stood up slowly and faced Miss Sandry. "Get," she said. "Get out of here now before I get me a sinner a-telling you where to go. Get to your wailing and your moaning." Miss Sandry's mouth dropped open. She stepped back, and then she became fierce. "I thought you was Christians." "So we are," Ma said. "No, you ain't. You're hell-burning sinners, all of you. And I'll mention it in the meeting, too. I can see your black soul a-burning now. I can see that innocent child and that there's girl's baby a-burning. That girl's belly a-burning." A low, wailing cry escaped from Rose of Sharon's lips. She's terrified for the rest of the book that she's going to lose that child. The rest of the book revolves around whether or not that child is ever born. Ma stooped down and picked up a stick of wood. "Get," she said. "Don't you never come back. I've seen your kind before. You'd take the little pleasure, wouldn't you?" Ma advanced on Miss Sandry. For a moment, the woman backed away, and then suddenly, she threw back her head and howled. Her eyes rolled up. Her shoulders and arms flopped loosely at her side. A string of thick, ropey saliva ran from the corner of her mouth. She howled again and again. Long, deep animal howls. This is someone who is possessed of the devil. Got possessed through all of this legalism. This isn't just a humorous story. This happens today. I've seen people like this. They just get possessed because of the don't do this and you can't do that. She howled again and again, long, deep animal howls. Men and women ran up from the other tents and they stood near, frightened and quiet. Slowly the woman sank to her knees, and the howl sank to a shuddering, bumbling moan. She fell sideways, and her arms and her legs twitched. The white eyeballs showed under the open eyelids. And a man said softly, "The spirit. She's got the spirit." Ma stood looking down at the twitching form, and then the manager comes up and sets the whole thing right. See, a lot of people look on those people as these great monuments of, true religion or something. Someone is saying, she's got the spirit. I remember, I've done enough study in this area. There are Pentecostal people, believe you me, I watched some of them on film one time, and I've seen them in person, who truly saliva drips out of their mouth. And they do go around biting on each other and howling and screaming like wild animals. And those are Pentecostal, fire-baptized, apostolic holiness groups, you know. They do handle snakes. Those things aren't just caricatures that are imposed on us by, you know, the evangelical, non-charismatic world out there. Those things actually happen. Those are frightening things. Those people are possessed of demons. But they're members of Pentecostal churches, though. I was at a place one time that was in a tent revival. You see, they've been brought up this way. You know, they think that is a manifestation of God, a manifestation of the Spirit. That when you get saved, your legs and arms just start twitching and jerking back and forth, and you start howling and rolling around and, you know, streaking, as the word was used back in the early 70s, stripping and literally streaking around the building, or streaking out to the woods, or climbing to the tops of trees and howling like a coyote out there or something. And they equate all that with having the Spirit. Legalistic people who have said, now how does legalism tie into that? It's all tied in together. You'd have to do a little more study maybe yourself. Here's a good example here, but it's just one story from Steinbeck's writings here, of people who are really like that, and who are the worst of sinners. I had to skip over one swear word that this deep down Jesus lover used here. And whenever someone, you know, when Paul says we're Christians here, and then tells her to get, well, you know, the woman is shocked here. She said, I thought you people were Christians here. And so she goes through all of this business. I'm sure a demon takes over. She falls down. Why would Steinbeck say that unless he had seen something like that happen before? You know, unless he had seen it or he knew about things like that really did or really were happening at his time. And they were. The birth of Pentecostalism, oh, there are some shady things going on. The birth of Pentecostalism. And there are a lot of shady things going on. Let me just jump into one other area, in the area of, well, Christian virtues. We go way back to the very beginning, where the man who, he first gets out of prison here at the beginning and goes to the, stops by the filling station. He's trying to work his way back home, and then he becomes part of the whole group and the family here who goes out to the valleys of California. And he meets an old preacher here. Let's see, I forget the preacher's name. But what I said a moment ago, or maybe if I didn't say it, let me say this, and I'll probably conclude on this, and I'll have a lot more things to say on Sunday morning in wrapping this up. That oftentimes these people who have these legalisms, their head says no, but their desires say yes. They have been taught you cannot go, no, to the movie theaters, no to any clutching or hugging or smooching or anything like that, or hand holding, nothing close to that, no to that. But does that mean that they're right in the eyes of God? Not if their desires are saying, I want to, I want to, I want to. And that's one of the basic problems of legalism. You're forced into a certain belief whenever your heart has never been changed. Either not converted or never changed over to this position, but you're forced into it because someone tells you, this is the right way, walk ye in it. And so you think, well, this is what I've got to do. No clutching, no hugging, no smooching, no hand holding, no movies, no lipstick. Well, here's the case of a preacher. This is a preacher. He's an important figure through a good bit of the book here. And he speaks in tongues. This is all about charismatic movement here at the beginning of this century. I want to show you what happened in some of those Pentecostal meetings because of their legalism. Because of their legalism, their head, their belief said, no, we can't do this. Their desires said, yes, we do want to do this. The preacher could not, well, let's see, should I start early? Well, go so far back. This is chapter 4, beginning of chapter 4. Job is walking, he comes across the preacher. He stopped whistling, sang in an easy, thin tenor. Yes, sir, that's my Savior. Jesus is my Savior. Jesus is my Savior now. On the level, this is not the devil. Jesus is my Savior now. And I remember the story here. It's kind of gross that he's watching the preacher, and the preacher spits. It's a big wad and spits, and it hits the dry dust and then rolls down the hill. Steinbeck is a master at taking just the ordinary, the common of life, and teaching for 2 chapters on it. And then slowly this little spitball picks up more and more dust as it rolls down the hill. And he'll go for 2 or 3 paragraphs on that. And you're sitting there and you have this vivid image of a spitball rolling in dust down the hill. And this is what the preacher's doing, and Joad is watching him. So they start talking about religion. He knows the preacher from Jim Casey, that's his name, from back before he was in prison. Okay, so the preacher tells some of his testimony, what he used. He doesn't preach anymore. He gave up preaching. You'll find out why here. The preacher nodded his head slowly. Every kid got a turtle some time or other. Nobody can keep a turtle, though. They work at it, and last one day they get out and away they go off somewheres. It's like me. I wouldn't take the good old gospel that was just laying there in my hand. I got to be picking at it and working at it until I got it all torn down. Here I got the Spirit sometimes and nothing to preach about. I got the call to lead the people and no place to lead them. Lead them around and around, said Joad. Sling them in the irrigation ditch. Tell them they'll burn in hell if they don't think like you. What you want to lead them someplace for, just lead them. The straight trunk tree had stretched along the ground. Joad moved gratefully into it and squatted on his hams and made a new smooth place on which to draw his thoughts with a stick. A thick-furred yellow shepherd dog came trotting down the road, head low, tongue lolling and dripping. It's so forth. The preacher, going someplace, Joad explained. Going for home, maybe. The preacher could not be thrown from his subject. Going someplace, he repeated. That's right. He's going someplace. Me, I don't know where I'm going. Tell you what, I used to get the people a-jumping and a-talking in tongues, and a glory shouting till they just fell down and passed out. And some I'd baptize to bring 'em to. And then, you know what I'd do? I'd take one of them girls out in the grass and I'd lay with her. Done it every time. Then I'd feel bad. And I'd pray and pray, but didn't do no good. Come the next time, them and me was full of the Spirit, I'd do it again. I figured there just wasn't no hope for me, and I was a damned old hypocrite, but I didn't mean to be. Joad smiled and his long teeth parted, and he licked his lips. There ain't nothing like a good hot meeting for pushing 'em over, he said. I done that myself. Preacher leaned forward excitedly. You see, he cried, I seen it was that way, and I started thinking. He waved his bony, big-knuckled hand up and down in a patting gesture. I got to thinking like this. Here's me preaching grace. And here's them people getting grace so hard they're jumping in and shouting. Now, they say laying up with a girl comes from the devil. But the more grace a girl got in her, the quicker she wants to go out in the grass. This is an antinomianism. There's a lot of theology right here in what he's saying. I got the page all marked up because there's a lot of theology there. A theology that Paul confronted back in his day. That, you know, the more grace that you have, then the more that you can sin because grace will overcome all of that. And also this business of, well, if you're saved, then you're saved. It doesn't matter what you do with your body. It's a Gnostic dualism there because flesh and that's matter and all of that's evil. That's going to perish one day anyway. It's the Spirit. He said, I'm preaching grace and they're getting grace, and yet you've got all of this hanky-panky going on. And I got to thinking, how in the world, how can the devil get in when a girl is so full of the Holy Spirit that it's spouting out of her nose and ears? You'd think that'd be one time when the devil didn't stand a snowball's chance below. But there it was. And he goes on and tells this story again. But you wasn't a preacher, Casey insisted, talking to Joad. A girl was just a girl to you. That wasn't nothing to you. But to me, they was holy vessels. I was saving their souls. And here, with all that responsibility on me, I'd just get them frothing with the Holy Spirit, and then I'd take them out and lay them in the grass. A lot of that has happened. A lot of that happens today. These meetings with no responsibility, a fly-by-night type individual, no responsibility, no intelligence, No checks and balances. Nothing safe there at all. Some of you are looking a little shocked. You just don't know enough and to know this goes on all the time. This isn't something just of the 1930s. This goes on all the time. Now it's not in the grass, it's in motels today. But you'll get a preacher in a place and get lots of people saved, and he's some young, nice-looking somebody, and then he'll take some of the girls out of the church then, getting them saved and everything. And his argument here, this is good theology, what he's thinking. He's saying that would be the one time you'd think that the devil wouldn't stand a chance there. How is it the devil is getting in? Whenever we're preaching grace, and he said, I'm getting them saved so much they're frothing at the mouth. The Holy Spirit's coming out their nose and ears. That's not how we know the Holy Spirit. He doesn't make you froth at the mouth or anything. And he doesn't make you twitch and your arm and your legs start twitching uncontrollably. That's not the Holy Spirit. That's just not God. Well, I'm running out of time. I'll read you one other illustration of this. Preacher laughed softly. You know, he said, it's a nice thing not being a preacher no more. Nobody used to tell stories when I was there, or if they did, I couldn't laugh, and I couldn't cuss. Now I cuss all I want to, anytime I want, and it does a fella good to cuss if he wants to. See, he was a preacher, and he gave all of that up because of the legalism. He saw all the hypocrisy in his own life. That's the same thing you find with legalistic-type people. You can't possibly hope to live these things, and you don't know the God of grace. And we're not saying grace gives you an excuse to sin, but you don't know the God of grace. You don't know His love. You don't know His forgiveness. You don't know His salvation. He's just out there. He just thought it was a thing to do was, you got to have a job, you got to make a living, so I'll become a preacher. And he became one, and yet his heart was not. I'm saying that their head says, no, you can't do this, but their desires scream, we still want to. That means something more basic. That means the thing that is most basic has never been dealt with to begin with. And those legalistic people are going to be stuck right there. And they'll end up below and not above. Because prior to that account on page 90 I was reading, they were telling dirty jokes, and he's so glad that now, finally, it used to be people thought he was a preacher. Anyone like myself who is a minister knows you get around people and they don't use that type of language anymore because you're a preacher, you're a minister. I've seen that happen so many times, you just, get sick of watching it happen. But now he's glad that I can be around these people. They don't feel uncomfortable anymore. They can just be themselves, And then I can cuss and I can tell the stories and we're just all together. What made such a man like that just fall away from it? Well, he never had anything to begin with. Why didn't he have something? It was a wrong approach, a wrong mental, spiritual approach to the whole issue. It was a legalistic one of what you can't do. And it seems like whenever it's a legalistic approach, the person always ends up falling. They don't have an appreciation of the spiritualness of whatever the matter is. They don't have any appreciation or comprehension of that. It's just we know that we can't do these things. And children are often brought up that way. You can't do this and you can't do that. It's never been explained to them the evils of this or why the holiness of God would prohibit or forbid such activity. It's never been explained like that. It's just Jesus is a-watching and He's going to smoke some of them out of here and He's a-counting up. Just that God is some type of tyrant that He's not. And that leads to this legalistic approach that we want to avoid.